Good afternoon, everyone. This is Angela Hernandez-Marshall with the U.S. Department of Education. I'm really glad to have you all here today, and I just want to double check before I move forward that everyone can hear me. So if I can maybe just have a few folks in the chat to confirm, yes, you can hear me, that would be great, and I'll move on. Great. Thank you, guys. I hope you're having a great start to your 2020 year. I'll go ahead and move us right along into our agenda for today. Besides my welcome, which is, again, welcoming you all and thanking you for taking the time from your busy schedules to be with us and discuss and kind of review what I think most of you are getting familiar with, and that's the data collection portion of the PDPDCS. I'm joined today by my colleagues at Westat Anlar, and that's Karen Schroll. You know Karen. For those of you who were at the meeting in November, you were able to see her and hear from her. And we're also joined by her colleague, Amanda Pierce. So Amanda is supporting the data collection system as well and will be part of our team moving forward. So today we just want to talk through the required work on your end for submitting the data on your participants for the professional development program. We really want to spend some time walking through the minutia around protecting participant data, that sensitive, personally identifiable information. So we'll have a few slides to walk through that today. We will just walk through briefly some frequently asked questions and want to make sure that you are aware or reminded of the resources that are available to you and to your program participants in order to get as complete data set as possible for this reporting year. Next slide. So again, a big welcome and thank you. Next slide. Actually, go back for just a second, Karen. I'm going to just mention a couple of things from folks. I just thought I'd clear up a couple of items. One is, and this is in response, I want to kind of share based on some questions I got from some of you. So I had somebody ask me recently, and it was a great question. I'm speculating that some of you, because you get communication from other parts of the department or from OESC, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, you may have received a newsletter from who basically our director's boss, and that is the Office of Formula Grants, which is really the umbrella for supporting many discretionary grant programs, including OIE. So we have some newsletters I know that go out through the Office of Formula Grants, and as you guys know, we are a discretionary grant, not a formula grant. So just an FYI that you might see that from time to time. We fall under that umbrella of what's called formula grants, but we in fact are a discretionary grant. We're competitive, so just want to clear that up. The other item I wanted to share, I know that some of you have heard, and I just wanted to clarify and let you know where we are. Our OIE director, who came on board in April of 19, Angeline Boley, will be leaving us at the end of next week. She has some wonderful opportunities that she's moving forward with, and we are really sad to see her go. But I did want to share with you that there certainly is a really critical emphasis on the part of OESC leadership to move very quickly for a replacement to ensure that we don't have a gap in the leadership here at OIE. So to that end, just a job posting for that position has already gone public, and that is available on USA Jobs. So I just wanted to let folks know that, let them know that that job solicitation is out there. If any of you feel up to the challenge, I'm not trying to take you away from this work, it's good work, but just wanted to mention that if there's anybody you want to pass that along to as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward there, Karen. So again, just a reminder about the purpose for the really long acronym, the Professional Development Program Data Collection System. So I know there are a couple of you that are new to this work, and I just want to clarify that the reason we have the data collection system is because we have to report, we're required to report by law participant training and payback information. It's a way for us to have very valid and reliable data that supplements your annual performance report, and I'll get to that in a little bit, which helps to inform, for those of you who are in the 17 and 18 cohorts, it informs substantial progress toward continuation award decisions, as you guys know. For our 16s, you'll be moving into that final performance report mode or into no-cost time extension, and I'll talk about that at a separate point in time. And then finally, it's a repository for data that we use to report overall performance to Congress and to the public about the professional development program. Next slide. So one other reminder, because we have so many systems here at the department, and I'm sure the ones that we have for this program are not the only ones that probably many of you have to interact with. Probably deal with a lot of other ones as well, but for the purposes of this program, we often ask you to interact with two different systems. So we have the Professional Development Program Data Collection System, or PDPDCS, and that's what we're going to be talking through today and walking through, and that's where you put individual student participant data in for tracking and financial management purposes. On the other side of the coin is the G5 grant system, the department-wide system that is used for many discretionary and formula grant programs, but that is a more robust system that really maintains all data related to your actual grant award and all data related to your approved grant application. It's where you go to submit the annual performance report, which is that Ed 524 template. And again, separate from the actual individual student data that you report in the DCS. Next slide. At this point, I'm going to turn it over now to my colleagues over at Laura with that.
Thanks a lot. This is Karen Schroll at WestStat. I'm going to walk through all of the actions that we're asking you to complete by April 3rd. So at this point, all of you should have gotten a notification email from the payback obligations at ed.gov email address. Hopefully all of you have acknowledged receipt of that email. If you either haven't gotten the email or haven't acknowledged receipt just yet, please go ahead and email payback obligations at ed.gov after this presentation, so we can either resend you the notification or make note that you've received it. We want to make sure that everyone got the notification and understands what needs to be done before April 3rd. So what I'm going to do right now is just sort of walk through each of the steps, and I will also sort of demonstrate a couple things as we go. So we're asking you to do 5 things, okay, by April 3rd. The first is, again, just simply logging into the PDPDCS and reviewing your secondary user assignment. Then we're going to have you, if you have anyone that was new, making sure that your participant list is up to date and adding any new participants. I know that some of the fiscal year 2018 grantees may have added some new participants and need to upload those service payback agreements and get those folks submitted into the system. The third thing we need everyone to do, and this covers for everybody, is that you'll need to go into your system and again, update the funding amounts, make sure that those amounts that are in our system match your records, both in terms of the amount of money that the student has received and the number of months that they've received funds. Those are the 2 things that are then can be reviewed by the participants on their end prior to them completing their paybacks. The fourth thing is to look at your main menu page and take a look at those participants that are still listed as having a service obligation status as awaiting login, or fulfillment not in progress. And I'll show you how you can check that. And then finally, the last one is just to make sure that those 4 steps are all done and in by April 3rd so that you're in compliance. So I'm going to go a little bit further into each one of those. So again, the first one is logging into the PDPDCS and making sure that your secondary user is correct. I know in looking at the data, we send out the notifications. We try to include secondary users whenever we could. I know some of you have delegated entering the data to a support person, and that is totally fine. We still want you to be able to log in and review the data, but it is perfectly acceptable and encouraged that you have a second person that can support you. The reason why we have everyone check the secondary users is if that individual has changed, we want to make sure that we're removing the access for someone that is no longer supporting you. We have the ability in G5 to find out who a new project director is or when that change happens, but we don't know that for secondary users. And so we rely on you to go in and make sure that is the right person that's there. When you log into the system, you're going to have your main menu page. If you scroll down, you'll see this lovely little summary report that has the record status for each of your participants. And again, by April 3rd, you want to have no pending records, okay? The other place that you're looking at here, again, is the program completion status and the participant payback status, and we'll get into those a little bit more. Where if you need to add a new participant, there's a link here where you can just click and say add new participant. And then if you want to just view, again, the list of all of the participants that you've ever entered, you're going to click that lower link. One of the things that we're going to emphasize a lot in this training today, and Angela will go into it in much more detail, is we have had some issues in terms of the service payback agreements. We need to make sure that all of those are redacted with the Social Security number, because once you enter it into the system, you no longer need it on the actual payback agreement anymore, and you need to go ahead and black that out. The other thing is making sure that you're uploading the correct form to the correct participant. Again, what we're trying to do, we're protecting the PII of those individual participants, and if you mistakenly upload the wrong file, you've given access to that information to someone that shouldn't have it. So again, we want to emphasize that the service payback agreements, like when you work on Section D, you want to make sure you're going through all of these steps in order to protect it. And we'll emphasize this kind of throughout the presentation. And again, in terms of updating the funding and service amounts, what I'd like to do real quick is I'm going to flip over to my, my Google Chrome page. Everyone should be seeing that. So I'm looking at one of my test grants, and you can see I have the same summary table here for my test user. When you click on the View All Participant page, you can see, again, the list of everyone. So all of you that still have those scholars that are still enrolled in your program, those are the scholars that those are the participants that you're going to want to go in and update in Section H. So again, it's coming down to Section H and making sure that the number of months is current and making sure that the funding amounts are current and updating that information and saving it. If you're done funding them, go ahead and check the box. Okay, see how it's not letting me check the box right now, and that's because I still have an enrollment status. I am still listed as having this person as enrolled. But once they're completed, I'll be able to indicate that this is the final amounts. Okay, and as we're going, please feel free to ask questions through the chat box. I'm more than happy to demonstrate things if you have specific questions. Let me come back here. The other piece that we're asking you to do is when you go again to that summary report and then click over and view all your participants, you'll be able to see if any of your participants are still having an awaiting login or fulfillment not in progress. So the two things I want to emphasize, we've been trying to get a hold of the participants and get them into the system. Anything you can do to push them to get into the system, we greatly appreciate. If we need to resend invitations, again, reaching out to the help desk, they are more than happy to resend invitations and help folks get in. If they're having issues logging into the system, again, we can set up a time to, kind of coach them through the whole process. The participants that have graduated or exited prior to completion should be working on fulfilling their service payback. And so we still have some where the fulfillment is not in progress. And again, here's where we're asking you to reach out to the participants and find out what's going on. Sometimes the reason why it says fulfillment not in progress is because the employer has not verified the employment. And so I just kind of want to encourage you to remind your participants that they're responsible for ensuring that their submitted employment gets reviewed and verified. The system will automatically send out the records to employers, but they need to check in with the employer if they log into the system and see that the employer hasn't done it. Again, we're more than happy to resend those verification links. We're more than happy to talk with employers on the phone, but it really is the responsibility of the participants to make sure that the employment gets verified. So if somebody is fulfillment not in progress, it doesn't necessarily mean they haven't entered employment. It just could mean that employment has not been verified.
Karen?
Yes.
Karen? I'm
Sure.
sorry, this is Angela. Can you go back to the prior slide, go back to the charts with the status report? So I just want to remind folks, so I know that at the start of the year, folks heard from me. You might have heard from me if I identified that as of January, you had participants who were, quote unquote, awaiting login, meaning that you didn't have a zero there, you had a number. I really want to emphasize the critical importance of addressing and mitigating any numbers appearing there other than zero. I will say for our 17 and our 8 cohorts, our 17 and 18 cohorts, that is a factor we do look at in reviewing for continuation awards. I can't stress that enough simply because it evidences two things. One, it evidences that you've been clear in communicating to participants their obligation to access and use this system to understand, know, and verify what their service payback obligation is, the dollar amounts, to make sure those are accurate and that they are reconciled with their own records and what they understand to be their obligation. Failure to do that, again, could impact your continuation award. I do also want to say that I'm very much aware of instances where you have made that outreach, but the participants themselves just have not taken the initiative to log in, even after your guidance, even after the prompting that Karen described that we do on our end. And all I ask is, when it comes to annual performance reporting time, and we'll go over this in the APR training, but I do want to emphasize, if you know you have a number of participants that are awaiting login and you've tried but can't get them to log in, you want to address that in your APR so that we know that you're aware and that you have made good faith effort, even if they have not moved forward on that. Fulfillment not in progress, as Karen described, could be any number of issues. That is not necessarily a make or break for the purposes of continuation awards. Thanks, Karen.
No problem. There is one question that was in the chat box about those of you that have students where their payback status is listed as pending. And that happens when a participant has been funded under more than one grant. We're working with the programmers so that it will display the correct status for your individual grant, but it's a little bit of a trickier bit of programming. The ones that say pending, you don't need to worry about. They would say pending is there. It actually shows that they've actually logged in usually on the other grants, so they're doing what they need to be doing. So you don't need to worry about the pendings, and I'm hoping before the end of the data collection we can possibly get the programmers to fix it so that you'll be able to see the actual individual payback status for your grant. Okay, and then my last, again, reminder is that our deadline is April 3rd. We have, we have our help desk available throughout this whole period. We encourage you to try and do all of this well before that last week, but we are there to support you. But again, as Angela was emphasizing in terms of the continuation funding, there are federal regulations that require you to meet this deadline by the April 3rd. So Angela's going to go into a little bit more detail. I'm sorry, yes.
Sorry.
No.
Thank you, Karen. So I mentioned at the top of the presentation that we wanted to touch base and go a little deeper into what we call security incidents. Next slide. So one of the issues, of course, that we run the risk of by virtue of collecting individual participant data, which is pretty unique, frankly, compared to most of the other programs that are managed in this division, is that, we have to collect individual data and data as sensitive as Social Security numbers, as Karen's talked about, and you guys well know. What I want to talk through is those times, which thankfully are very infrequent, but those times that participants' data are exposed. So a security incident occurs if that personally identifiable information is potentially viewable to unrelated parties. So she has two examples up here, and one is you've uploaded a service payback agreement that you didn't cross out the Social Security number or personal information, and it went into the wrong participant record, meaning that the wrong participant could be looking at somebody else's payback agreement and their personal information, including a Social Security number. Similarly, sending an unencrypted email with information like a Social Security number or detailed contact information for an individual participant to the help desk, or for that matter to me, or anybody else in your institution, the key being unencrypted. This is something, like I said, that happens very infrequently, but it's something that we want to talk about what sort of the impacts are on this. Next slide. So here's what happens when this incident. So I'm gonna poke on and pick at poor Carmelita just because I saw her name pop up in the chat box. Carmelita sends me an email that happens to have an individual student participant. She hasn't done this, by the way, but an individual student's Social Security number and contact information. If she's done that, then I immediately have to notify our Security Operations Center. They have to document the incident, and you know how much fun we in the federal government have with paperwork. So there's lots of paperwork that gets to get filled out and has to be worked to expunge the file or the email from either the DCS or from the email servers. And I'm saying me, but quite often, to the extent that this does occur, it falls often to, the burden falls often to Karen and staff with ANLR Westat. It also requires that we review all other participant records and documentation to make sure that there aren't more of these problems that just haven't been caught yet. So obviously a lot of resources have to go into this. Additional interviews and investigations might be required if somebody who was not authorized to see the data, i.e. another participant saw somebody else's, they're going to be contacted. It can get really, it can really turn into this huge snowball effect. Next slide. So you and your group of your team in general are also impacted, because then you become required to resubmit the participant documentation and complete the security incident report documentation and participate in any interviews that investigators decide need to be done. Project directors and in some cases secondary users will be required to participate in a training to understand the proper handling of the participant PII and the consequences of the data breaches. Just a sidebar, that type of security training, by the way, is something that Karen and all of the help desk staff and myself have to complete on an annual basis anyway. So, but it becomes a burden to you to have to do that as well. The grant, and finally, this is something that really does become much more significant in terms of direct impact on you and frankly your project, and that is when the security incident happens, you get placed on a list, and if further incidents occur, the grant or your institution could be, or organization could be placed on a high-risk status, which can influence future funding opportunities. So I just want to be clear about that, and again, I'm really happy to say that this has been really far from frequent, quite infrequent, I think. Would you agree, Karen, in terms of our grantees and these types of incidents?
Yes, you guys have done a really great job. We just want to emphasize this so we don't have any. I think we've only had one in the 6 years we've been doing this. But we've had several others on the other programs. And so, again, we just want to remind everyone. And, again, reminding your participants, too, like the last several incidents that we've had have been participants, or the Office of Special Education students emailing us their own PII, but then emailing it unencrypted, like sending us just a picture of their Social Security card. So again, remind them to protect their own information too. The email isn't secure, that we need to add another layer.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. So again, just some ways, some different ways to mitigate this issue. Developing a file upload checklist to review the service payback agreement for the correct name. Ensure the Social Security number is redacted and the file name is correct. So again, just sort of, you already have in place a series of procedures that you do to complete any particular file in the data collection system for a participant, adding sort of this quality control, this checks and balances to make sure that you don't upload anything that you shouldn't, or into the wrong place. 2, implementing a file naming convention to avoid uploading the wrong file to a participant's record. 3, always encrypting the files being sent by email, and especially and including to the help desk or to me or to anybody. And again, I think a rule of thumb simply is anything that's coming to us in particular or the DCS in an email should be something that you wouldn't mind seeing published on the front page of the newspaper. So it should be something that's nascent and not consequential like this. And if it is, making sure that they're encrypted, and if you have questions about encrypting, working with your respective IT office to get that resolved. And then finally, reviewing all files after you upload, again, just going back through for a quality control check to make sure that the writing agreement has been uploaded to the right participant.
Thank you, Angela. All right. I am Amanda Pierce, and I'm seeing a lot of familiar names. I may have spoken with you if you've called into the help desk or you've seen an email from me. I'm just going to chat about some frequently asked questions that we have received through the help desk. Okay. So the first one is a big one. How do I reset my password? There is a link to reset your password on our login screen. What happens when you click that link is you will enter the email address, which is your username for your account, and you will receive an email from Payback Obligations with a new link and a key code. Once you click that new link and copy and paste the key code, you'll be able to create a new password for your account. Just as a reminder, grantees must update the information in the PDPDCS for all the participants within 30 days of enrolling a participant, in a change of the participant status if they have graduated or exited from the program, and at the end of your grant's fiscal year. Okay, the other thing is we get this from both grantees and participants that they're not receiving emails from the Payback Obligations at ed.gov email address. So you want to make sure that you've added that address to a contact list. And if you haven't received emails, be sure to let us know at the help desk. The other thing is when you're entering participant email addresses, make sure that you are entering a more personal email address, not the one that's used at your university, so that the participants will have access to that email address long after graduation. Secondary user. We definitely recommend having a secondary user on your account. You, project directors, are responsible for entering information in the PDPDCS, but you are allowed to have one secondary user per grant, so only 2 people then have access to the grant. And secondary users will have their own login that's unique for them. And we also send reminder emails and notifications to the grant secondary user. In the past, we found this chart to be helpful to you and your grant staff. Just some reminders about requirements of the service payback agreement. You must redact the service or payback agreement within 30 days of the participant's enrollment in the program, and so you want to make sure that you are have that signed from the participant, and that it's then uploaded to the PDPDCS within 30 days. Prior to uploading that service payback agreement, you want to make sure you're using the correct version of the payback agreement. We have a new version that will be posted on our website, to make sure that if you're having any payback agreement signed this year, that you are using that new version with the expiration date of 8/31/2022. You've included all the pages of the payback agreement, that everything's written legibly, and that it's signed by both the participant and the grantee. And as mentioned multiple times in our presentation, make sure that Social Security number is redacted. Okay, so grantees will not be able to submit any of the records of participants if they have not uploaded the service payback agreement. Again, make sure that you have redacted any Social Security numbers on the payback agreement before you upload it, and that to know that grantees may be responsible for a payment in cases where they don't have valid signed agreements for a participant. Okay, so what do you need to tell your participants about their payback? You clearly need to make sure you're explaining to your participants before they accept the funding that they're required to log into the PDPDCS and submit eligible employment to receive credit toward their payback, that they must update this employment information annually, and that they may be able to fulfill their obligation through service once they've completed or exited the program. So not while they're in the program. Participants who do not submit eligible employment information verified by their employer on time through the PDPDCS and they're not fulfilled will be referred to the Accounts Receivable and Bank Management Division, ARBMD, for repayment. Okay, so if your grant is ending, what do I need to do in the PDPDCS? If your grant is ending, at the end of your grant, all of your participants will either need to be listed with a status of exited without completion or graduated before the date the grant ends.
Amanda, this is Angela. I'm going to ask you to go back that one slide just to clarify for folks. So this is where I know it gets frustrating for some of you who know that even if a student, for example, or you knew that they were going to continue the program even after the grant support had ended, and it's not like they're leaving the school, it's just that they're no longer part of this grant per se, you still need to circle or enter exit without completion if in fact they have not graduated and completed the training program. So exit without completion doesn't necessarily mean only that the student has dropped out, but might also mean that the participant is continuing but hasn't completed the training yet. So I just want to clarify that for folks.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so how does the Office of Indian Education use the data that the grantees are reporting? The data is used to support program performance measures, of course, to track the payback obligation of the participants who've received grant funding, report to ARBMD for cash repayment when the participants do not meet the payback obligation, and to inform for internal reports, grant monitoring, and program improvement activities. Also, we have the quarterly monitoring reports, the QMR, to assist the OIE project officers in monitoring status of the participants enrolled and in preparation for program funding. This is an example of what a QMR would look like. It looks very much like the homepage in the DCS, the summary page of your grant. Okay. So we have some lessons learned. Be sure that you're using the OMB cleared payback agreement that is available on our website. An agreement that is created by a university is not valid. You must use the one that has been cleared by OMB. Ensure that all of your participants are in the submitted status. If they're left out in a pending status, then they will be deleted. Like I said in the beginning, that all scholar records need to be submitted within 30 days of project entry. To ensure that you have the same number of participants that you submitted in your APR, that you reported in your APR, that they're submitted in the PDPDCS, if that number matches, and that you have asked your participants to log in and review all the information that you've entered. We're all human, and sometimes we certainly enter inaccurate information, so we want to make sure that the participants have reviewed that information and that it is accurate. Okay. Angela, I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss this slide.
Yes, thank you. So folks, I want to highlight a couple of things, and then I know we have some resources to cover, but I also want to make sure we get to your questions that I know are popping up in the chat box, so we will come back to those. So feel free to keep posting those. Thank you. So as Karen and Amanda have talked about, the records deadline for participants, this data collection we've talked through today, is due by April 3rd. I do want to call your attention to the revised APR submission deadline, which will be April 14th. That said, you can expect in the next couple of weeks I will be sharing out guidance. I am going to have a voluntary training webinar event to walk through the APR. And there will be specific items that I want to make sure are addressed in your APR. They're not anything new. It's just clarifying and making sure everybody's on the same page to ensure completion or complete APRs. So just be on the lookout for that. This is a couple of weeks earlier than we were originally estimating back in September. And the reality of the situation is, as you guys are probably aware, we anticipate many grant competitions happening out of this office, and so the opportunity to complete no-cost or non-competitive continuation awards review and award earlier would be greater, would certainly be beneficial to the program office and ultimately to you to be aware sooner. So I just want to again call your attention to that deadline. Next slide. So resources and support. Amanda and Karen, I'll just cover this real quick. The archived webinar, somebody asked that question about will this be available. This recording will be made available at this link, and we will send out that link to everybody afterward. Want to call everybody's attention to the frequently asked questions that are accessible from the homepage of the DCS. So please be sure to go to those FAQs because you will often see answers to questions that you might have later that you aren't thinking of now. Next slide. And then service payback agreements, the current regulations, and again, the frequently asked questions. Again, you'll have access to this website, and you'll be able to, or this webinar, and you'll be able to access these links via that after today's event. Next slide. So one really important thing before we jump to the questions, and Karen, I might ask you to walk us through the questions. I can help you answer as needed, as appropriate. But I do want to remind folks, so it happens often where grantee or participants rather, who might already be separated from your program are looking for help. I can't emphasize enough your sharing early and often with participants this help desk contact information. Oftentimes they will be looking to me for the answers, and pretty much every answer that they might actually have is going to be answered through the help desk. If it's a policy issue or there's some extenuating circumstances, I would still encourage going through the help desk because those issues will get elevated to me, whether it's you asking them or the participant asking them. So again, I'd appreciate your cooperation with that. With that, let's go over to the questions. And Karen, I wasn't sure where we kind of left off. So.
Sure. I've been trying to answer as we kind of go along. Okay. There's a couple things that have come up through the questions that where I've directed folks back to the help desk, and that's because I want someone to take a closer look. But I do want to touch on some of the questions that we have been getting. Again, if you have any issues logging into the system, please reach out to the help desk, because that should be working for you. And if it's not, we'll need to troubleshoot and figure out if there's something further that needs to be done by the programming staff. So we touched on the question about the pending status. Carmelita also asked a question about she having some participants that are listed as fulfillment not in progress because they're still working on securing employment. And participants do have a year with which to secure employment. So again, as Angela said, them being in a fulfillment not in progress status is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just important to check on whether or not that is the issue, that they just haven't secured it yet, or whether it hasn't been verified or they just haven't gone in to enter it. And so it's important to kind of sort them into those different groups. There was a question about whether or not there could be more than one secondary user, and unfortunately right now we just have it set up for one. So there's two people with access. There's the project directors that are considered our main super user, and then there's space for one secondary user. There was a question about if an employer doesn't verify the employment by April 3rd, 2020, is the participant going to be referred? And the answer is well, no, more than not anything, it depends. Most of the scholars are not tied to that date. It's based on whether or not when they exited your program and when that year is up, and whether or not they've entered any employment and whether it's been verified. So again, the goal by April 3rd is to make sure all of your updates are in as a grant project director, that you've done those pieces that we talked about in terms of adding any new participants, exiting, reporting people as completing, and updating funding amounts and number of months funding was received.
So Karen, let me just add to that. Sure. In terms of the follow-up and this issue of sort of the process by which, you know, an employer may or may not verify employment. I mean, there are two things that really I would strongly encourage you all as project directors and your team, your respective coordinators, to be sure to do, again, early and often with participants. And that's really underscoring with them their obligation, their own responsibility in following up with the employer to make sure that that verification has occurred. We've talked about the limitations of this system and how it does outreach, not just to the employer, meaning, you know, they have to respond to an email that gets generated as a result of the participant's information, job information that gets put in, but, you know, also know that it's not this automatic trigger to just hurry and report people to debt referral. There is, again, there's automated triggers to alert the participants as well about their status. So if they're not receiving emails from the data collection system, back to the earlier guidance of make sure that they know that this email address is where they're going to get any messages coming to them about their status and about any issues that they need to respond to. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Angela. There was a question about having a student who decides to delay their start date by a semester, and would the student need to sign another agreement? So you met with the student, they committed to enrolling, but now have decided to delay. So the answer is yes, we would like a new payback agreement that would match their official start date. So go ahead and have them sign a new one, and really, you know, we want only participants that have actually, you know, started the program and received funds. So, you know, you can hold off on adding that person to the system until they actually start receiving funds and are in the program. There There was a question about whether or not a participant can complete a payback with employment, even if they leave without completion. The answer is yes. That's participants who do have a status of exit prior to completion, and there's a variety of reasons why someone may have that status, can fulfill via service, assuming they can find eligible employment.
I think just a reminder, Karen, I think the other assumption in there is that they ultimately, even if it was outside the period of the project, they did ultimately get licensure, right, to go and teach. So it's meeting those requirements of having achieved the licensure in order to be able to get that qualifying employment. So just want to make sure that's clear.
There was another question about looking at older grants and where folks haven't reported employment. I asked Maria, if you have access to older grants because you were part of the paper-based system, we are more than happy to work with you to update those records. We have not transferred everything from the paper system yet, so it would be great to kind of set up a one-on-one session to kind of talk through the status of that grant. There was a question about whether or not the PowerPoint would be shared, and it'll be available on the website under the Resources tab. Nancy reported that when she's going into the PDP and looking at the individual participants page, that she's no longer seeing the service payback agreement. And so that is concerning to me because it should be there. So, so to go ahead and please, if you're noticing any issue like where you're not seeing the payback agreement that you uploaded, to please reach out to the help desk so that we can look into it further and find out what's going on. There's a question. I think you
got everything, Karen.
Did I get everything? All right.
I think so. One question was, if they do obtain qualifying employment outside of completion, whom should they contact? The help desk. They should always go to the help desk for support for how they ensure verification of employment, how they update their personal information, anything related to that service payback obligation, that should be their first stop.
Yes.
Okay. And Karen, not seeing any other questions right now. I'll just say, folks, of course, if you do have questions, you know where to go, whom to email or phone. Again, if it's a broader policy question, I'm happy to answer that. And just one final reminder that you will hear from me in the coming weeks regarding annual performance reporting and moving forward with that. That's all I have on my end, Karen. Unless you have anything else, or Amanda, to add?
I see a couple more questions that came in.
Okay.
I've asked there's a question about the payback agreement that's currently on the site. I've asked the programmers to check that and update it. Please check it by tomorrow afternoon. It should be showing the correct version. Again, if you have concerns about any of your participants and the status that they're showing in the system, again, feel free to reach out to the help desk. And then if they can't help you or you want a more scheduled time, please ask them to schedule a meeting with Amanda or myself. We're taking the lead on OIE, and we'd be more than happy to meet with you. I think that was the last of the questions that I saw.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, well, everyone, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. And if there are any questions, again, you know who to reach out to. And I wish you all the best for the rest of this semester or quarter, wherever you are in the process. Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.